Hi, my name is Scott Lilly, and this is my introductory video for the Air Power Studies course for Squadron Officer School. I currently work at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where I'm a contracting specialist in the Global Hawk Program Office. Prior to that, I was a contracting specialist in the AFRL, Air Force Research Labs contracting shop. Like I said, both were located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Prior to this facilitated course, we had to take a number of self-paced courses. And in these self-paced courses, my main takeaway came from the Intro to Warfare Studies. In that course, we had to read an article called The Future of War as the Nature of War Changes. The familiar dividing lines of our world are blurring across the board by Thomas Ricks. In that article, the author points out that the nature of war has changed for a number of reasons, being technology, the rise of us having to face non-conventional adversaries or adversaries using non-conventional tactics, and cyberspace. Particularly, the author goes into some areas in which the traditional dividing lines had been blurred. Those lines consist of the military and criminal, in which now, due to the rise of terrorism, we are starting to try these individuals in civilian courts. We had military and civilian roles. And the example the author gave here was civilian social workers or civilians in general helping with the rebuilding of Afghanistan. This actually plays a role in my job, although I directly have not gone over to Afghanistan. A number of civilians have for the Air Force to help with the rebuilding there, operating in a contracting specialist or contracting officer role. The next one was the public and private blurring of the lines. The author here gave us an example of a contractor working in the CIA drone program, in which, let's say, the drone attacks a target but accidentally kills a civilian. The question then becomes, is that civilian protected the same way, or not civilian, that contractor, that a public employee would under certain immunities in that nature, or could that contractor be charged with the murder? The next one would be military and intelligence. Was an example. Another example, the lines that are blurring, in addition to the domestic and foreign lines that are blurred. And finally, the last was the traditional concept of sovereignty in general is blurring. And the easiest way to look at that is just cyberspace in general, in which a private individual can launch an attack against a country or another country from the basement of their own home. How does one respond to that? It's not as if we take Romania, for example, if a hacker in Romania attacked the United States or New York City's power grid, it's not as if Romania itself sanctioned that attack. So how does one respond? And that was the main takeaway that I got leading into this course, primarily just because of the nature of warfare, how it has changed, and how those lines have blurred. And of course, that to some degree affects my job as well. And then, so next, that leads us into what do I believe is the greatest challenge to Air Force air superiority in a national security sense, or air power in a national security sense. And to me, the most critical issue or the most challenging issue in that is the United States not being prepared for the next major conflict. This was highlighted in the article Preparing for the Next Big War, in which the authors identified 6 gaps, 5 of which the government could actively be preparing for, and then the 6th being more of a cultural type of issue. But those 5 gaps were precision munitions and advanced weaponry, being able to mass produce those. The second was platforms. So far, thankfully, in our more recent conflicts, we haven't actually lost a lot of aircraft or ships for that matter. So being able to, having the assembly lines ready to go to be able to mass produce those is a gap that they identified. They also identified in the third our troop levels, in that currently we would not have a force large enough to fight another major conflict. 4 would be planning and adaptability, having that gap. 5 is technology, being able to, especially in the cyber sense, be able to respond to our adversaries in a appropriate and aggressive way. I think, if my memory serves me correctly, in this article, one of their solutions would be to commandeer or convince Silicon Valley private individuals and companies to assist us in bridging that gap. And then 6 is stamina. This one's not anything the government could directly do to help fill the gap, in that getting the American people ready for a conflict in which there'd be a large loss of life that we haven't seen in my lifetime. And I think the closest thing that anybody would have seen would have been in Vietnam. And getting America prepared for that type of investment and things of that nature would be it would be a hard task, and it's not one that is necessarily suited for the government. But going back to the platforms issue and the troops levels issue, another article highlighting where we may be falling short in that, and it would be mainly troops, but it relates back to the platforms. It was an article in the Military Times called "The Military Stunning Fighter Pilot Shortage" by Stephen Luzzi, and that was published 11 April 2018, in which he talked about how 1 in 4 fighter pilot billets is currently not filled. So if we go back to the fact we currently don't have enough troops, soldiers, sailor, airmen, to launch or to engage in a large-scale conflict, we also don't have enough fighter pilots right now to do it. And this is something that we couldn't just snap our fingers and get done, because the average fighter pilot's training is roughly 5 years. So if we were to engage in a major conflict tomorrow, by the time we had enough fighter pilots, it would take, and if we had all the fighter pilots we needed to start training that day, it'd be 5 years into the war before we were able to actually use these individuals under our current training. Granted, in situations like that, we would expedite it, but that's not necessarily what we want to do when we can start preparing for it now. So now we have to ask, I've identified these gaps, or the article identified these gaps. So why do I think that's the most critical issue facing us, when we can all probably agree that the likelihood of us engaging in a major conflict, and when we say major conflict, I should define what we mean here. We're talking about a large-scale conflict, one that would have to be with another, or at least a regional power like China or Russia, or a large-scale Middle East type conflict, not just confined to one country. And while the odds of this are low, the problem, or the reason why I still identify it's most critical, is that if we are unprepared, the results would be catastrophic to the United States and to our air power in general if we were to be caught flat-footed, if we don't address these gaps now. Whereas other issues that are currently in the news or in our face, like cybersecurity and things of that nature, while seem to be the most urgent, we're getting the coverage and we're already diverting our resources there. So that's why I deem this to be the most critical. One, because it's not being addressed at the same level as some of the other issues, and also the results for us not addressing this could be catastrophic.